Good evening, everyone. We're going to have another great debate. This time it's going to be between Victor Vargas and Brian Ballard. Victor will be taking the position of supporting the resurrection. Do we have good evidence for believing the resurrection? Brian's going to be the opposition to that. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to have an opening for 5 minutes each. Victor may want to do a rebuttal, then we'll do or both will do a rebuttal, then we'll do a cross exam. Victor will want to do a cross examination, perhaps with Brian. Then we'll have an open conversation for about 45 minutes, perhaps. Then we'll get the Q&A, and that's where I want you guys to participate, man, and ask all the questions you can. Let's make it interesting, and then each one will close for 5 minutes. So I'm going to bring our debaters on. How are you guys doing today?
I'm good, good. I'm ready.
Good to see you guys.
Yes, sir. Let me get that echo out of here. All right. So we're going to get right into it. So we're going to go ahead and let Victor open up this debate with his opening. And then we're going to let Brian do the same after Victor is done. So tighten up your seatbelts, guys. It's going to go down. Let's keep it spicy, but let's keep it respectful. Victor, you go ahead and take the floor. It's all yours.
All righty. Okay, thank you guys. I'm honored to meet Mr. Brian live and Scotty. We debated with Scotty before. So we know each other from Fight of the Fans, the group that we've been on for years. So this is a very long topic, and it's the one that I'm always been to see just claims, valid claims, or they verifiable, or they falsifiable. And this whole week, I've been busy looking at all types of debates. Now, I'm going to take the 12 arguments. I had a very long opening, but we cut it short. I think Mr. B and I agree that we can discuss this in an open discussion. But my opening goes as follows. I want to give credit to all Christian apologists and non-friendly sources like Gerd Ludeman, Butterman, John Dominic Crossan, Raymond Brown, William Lane Craig, Gary Habermas, which is, I know Mr. B knows that's my favorite. We got also, I've seen debates from Robert Price, the mythicist, Richard Carrier, another mythicist, and Michael Licona, and so on. Because the reason I mention them first is because most of these arguments and all these debates, they're the most popular ones. And those are the ones that when I watch those debates, I've never seen them really address these issues. So here's the 12 historical facts for the resurrections. And on the open discussion, we can discuss if these sources are reliable. So the topic is, do we have good evidence for the resurrection? Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Do we have good reasons to believe in the resurrection? Here we go. Here are the 12 claims. Jesus died by crucifixion. All the scholars that I named, none of them disputed that Jesus Christ by crucifixion. This is well attested in the four Gospels, and it's also in the Pauline creeds. In the year 20 years after Jesus' death, it was written by Paul, so that's 20 years close to the event. A lot of scholars date the First Corinthians 15, 3-7, 5 years later, but I'll go with 20 years. Jesus was buried by Joseph by Arimathea. Okay. Now, this is very interesting because as you could see, if somebody makes sure that this guy was buried, Jesus was buried. He was also buried in a tomb where there was a huge stone placed and it was guarded by Roman soldiers. Okay. Let us remember that because we're going to discuss this with Mr. B. His death that his death caused the disciple to despair and lose hope. So this argument goes as follows. Many Jews were expecting a Hercules Messiah, somebody who was going to come and rescue them from the Roman Empire or from any oppressor. That didn't happen. Jesus came in a different perspective. Okay, so in actuality, if we see, nobody really believed Jesus who he was claiming to be. Jesus was claiming to be God. And here's the empirical claim that I want to address. Jesus said in John chapter 2, okay, destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up. The Jews thought he was talking about the temple, in Jerusalem, but no. The John, the author, addressed these issues and he says that they remember when he was risen that he was talking about the temple of his body. So here is the empirical claim. Jesus claims that he will bodily die and bodily resurrect. Bodily resurrect. Okay? So nobody believed, not his family, nor his friends, even worse, his enemies, what Jesus claiming to be. Okay? The tomb was empty. Okay? Now, here's what I found very interesting. After Jesus was raised, and we see that disciples immediately preaching the gospel. And worst of all, where the people could have gone to the tomb and say, wait a minute, you guys are here. But his enemies, the enemies of Jesus and the disciples say, oh, the disciples stole the body. That was their argument. I think in every scholar belief, friendly and unfriendly sources, this could have ended Christianity right there and then. Hey, listen, they're preaching the gospel, but guess what? They're preaching a bodily resurrection, but guess what? The body's still found in the tomb. So they're lying. That could have ended Christianity right there and then. Okay? The disciple was transformed from doubters to bold proclaimers after they saw the body. Okay? The resurrection was the central message. Destroy the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and down goes Christianity. They preached the message of Jesus' resurrection in Jerusalem. The church was born and grew. Orthodox Jews who believe in Christ made Sunday their primary day of worship. James was converted to the faith when he saw the resurrected Jesus. Okay? James was a family skeptic. Paul was converted to the faith. Paul was an outsider skeptic. Okay, so here's the thing that I want to see how Mr. Brian answered these questions. So the family didn't believe, the disciples didn't believe who he was claiming to be. When on the third day the Jesus was resurrected, he presented himself first to the women. How do you explain that when women testimony was not valid? I'm trying to make this short as possible. Also, the family, what did they say? The passage, Jesus responded, who is my family? Who is my mother? And who is my family? But those who do the will of my Father. But the reason they were looking for him, because they thought he was crazy. Okay? So after the resurrection, we see a dramatic change. We see a dramatic change. We see a rapidly growth of the Christian church. That's why we have Christianity today. How else can we explain the rise of Christianity? How else can you explain Paul's conversion? Now, imagine you are your enemy agreeing with you, even in the courts of law. If you're being convicted of a crime, but then the person that's convicting you turns around and says, nope, Victor is actually not guilty. Now the judge is going to reverse whatever they thought they were going to put me guilty of, because now I have the enemy that was trying to destroy me. Let's say the prosecutor turns around and say, well, Your Honor, we made a mistake. He's really not guilty. So how do you answer that when Paul thought he was doing the Jews a favor by stopping Christianity? Okay. Um, Also, James, the brother. Imagine you imagine your older brother telling you he's God. James definitely did not believe Jesus was God. But look what happened. He converted to the faith. So these are the basic, these are the 12 arguments. How do we respond to this? How did Mr. Brian can answer these questions?
All right.
That's
So
this is my
that's
basic opening.
good job, man. So we're gonna let Brian present his opening. This isn't necessarily a response to your opening, of course, but it's going to be Brian's opening, and then we can get into the rest of the format. But go ahead, Brian. The floor is yours, sir.
All right, thanks, gentlemen. My basic position is pretty much it follows general scholarship. Jesus Christ was a apocalyptic preacher, first century Palestine. He definitely wasn't a man. He definitely existed. I really reject the mythicist ideas. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. But there's where the story kind of diverges. What we would expect to see is that Jesus would not be buried in a tomb. He would have been thrown into a common grave. And that's even part of the punishment. They were crucifying thousands of people at that time. They were all buried in mass graves. The story of Joseph of Arimathea is just a later legend. My hypothesis, and a lot of scholars agree with is this is just like any other religion. This is how religions are started. Jesus was crucified. His followers were shocked. Now, these were people that believed in all kinds of supernatural things. These were also people that were a little bit outside of society. They were Jews, but they were following a different cult, and they were developing a whole different religion, sort of like the Mormons did here early in America. So these people somehow talked themselves into believing that Jesus had risen. Maybe one guy had an hallucination, said, I saw Jesus. The next person just passed it on, and it grew in legend. This is really a common occurrence. A lot of religions start just this way. We can kind of get into a little bit of what Victor talked about, because we can start with Paul. I agree, Paul was writing 20, 30 years later. Paul never saw Jesus. Paul had some kind of vision. He heard a voice, he heard sounds. That's what he knew about Jesus. Um, Definitely a persecution complex. He was persecuting these people. Again, we have to put ourselves into the times. Everybody was superstitious, and these were also kind of difficult times. He had some kind of fit, he had some kind of experience. Maybe he just decided on his own to embrace Christianity. But however it is, he was not an eyewitness to the crucifixion. At that time, he had not, as far as we know, met any of the disciples. He did get the creed from existing Christians. So we know that Christians existed at that time. But it was easy just for a few people to start developing legends. And that's kind of how the Gospels are. Paul was writing in the 50s. Mark, I'm going with scholarly consensus, 70s as earliest. So what happened in between all of that? Paul doesn't say anything about the tomb. He doesn't say anything about the virgin birth. He doesn't say anything about much of anything about the man Jesus. He was born of a woman, he was crucified, and he rose. And that's about all we know. That's probably because those stories hadn't developed yet. The Gospels were written by 4 anonymous authors decades after the fact. They were written in Greek. They weren't written in Aramaic. They were written in Greek. And we don't know where, when, or by who, how the whole thing started. Now, there's all kinds of different theories on that. Did the Romans do it? I've heard theories that Josephus started Christianity, that the Romans did. All that's all far-fetched. It's just an easy case of legend development. We see it in Mark, it's the simplest gospel. We go from Luke and Matthew that copy Mark and expound on him and enlarge the legend. In John is like a separate book. He's got that high Christology right there. But what people also don't think about was, what about the other gospels that were further down? What the Gospel of Peter, outlandish stories, a talking cross, um, but it's just fanciful. And then we have the other gospels, and as time goes on, the legend gets bigger and bigger. This is really common. And one thing I would like to try today is to use a little bit of what we call the outsider criteria. Whatever evidence you have, if another religion has that same evidence, why do you reject theirs and accept yours? To see if we're all trying to overcome our biases, in other words. And I'd like to see some of that. Basically, I think that's my position. I guess when we get into it, we can go over some of Victor's points here.
Okay, very good. So Brian wants to bring in to examine whether you're special pleading, Victor, by doing an outsider test of faith, so to speak. And Victor has brought up 12 points that should be considered good evidence to believe that the resurrection is historical, despite all of that. So we're going to get into the rebuttal portion, which is 5 minutes here. We're going to let you guys go at it here for a rebuttal. So Victor, go ahead, and for 5 minutes, I want you to rebut what he just told you, okay? Go for it.
Okay. All right. So Mr. Bryan agrees that Jesus existed. We still have the claim whether he's God or whether he raised from the dead. He didn't respond to that. Mr. Bree agrees that Paul meets Jesus, and he thinks that Paul has a guilty conscience. Why would I have a guilty conscience if I believe that what I'm doing, I'm right? It is very clear that what changed the mind of Paul, it is very well attested. Okay? He said, I went back to Jerusalem to make sure that I was preaching was the truth. I met Jesus. My gospel did not come from men, but from Jesus. The only way he can call himself an apostle, and he does this in all his Pauline letters, is if he met Jesus. You cannot call yourself an apostle if you haven't met Jesus. The whole claim of Paul is that we have a body resurrection. Okay? The attestation is too early for legends or to be a myth. Remember, we have Greece. The First Corinthians is dated 5 years later, but I grant you 15 years more. We also have the early attestations of Galatians, where he says, I went back 13 years later. That's way too close to the event for some legend to be built. And that still doesn't hold water, because why would Paul accept another religion knowing that by him rejecting Judaism, it meant death? What motive did he have? We find no rational motive for him to leave Judaism unless he saw the risen body of Christ. Okay? Also, who wrote the Gospels? This is very easy. That's the argument from Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman says, okay, look, we don't know who wrote the Gospels. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Okay. Matthew was a tax collector. Matthew was a tax collector. What does that mean? That he knew how to write, he knew how to read, he knew how to do math. The Roman Empire is not going to hire a Jew who is illiterate. So Matthew's tax collector. Luke was a physician, and is known to be the best historian for the Gospels. Also, John, yes, there was an argument who wrote the Gospel of John because they were confused of John the disciples and John the elders, but it was determined by all scholars, and it is agreed that it was John the disciple who wrote it. That was the youngest. Okay. Also, the book of Mark, Matthew, and Luke did not copy Mark. The one who was trying to destroy Christianity made an argument. When a journalist is writing a story, he makes sure whoever other else wrote the story, and to see how much in agreement they have while they did their investigation. So that's not really a copy in somebody else. That's what Bart Ehrman argues, that this is a copy of this copy and this is a copy. But when you really look at the evidence, what happens is journalists or historians, they say, well, Mark wrote this. I want to make sure that my investigation is really going along with Mark's investigations. So we do know who wrote the Gospels. Also, remember, the church fathers mentioned this 100 years later. 100 years later. That is way too early to be a legend. Okay. Also, what about the other gospel? Well, this is very clear. Let's talk about Thomas. Thomas was in the time of Jesus. What? Let us suppose he was 30 years old in the time of Jesus. The book of Thomas was written what? In the year above 200? Was he 200 years old when he wrote it? It is very determined that the Gospel of Thomas is not an accurate book. Also, philosophically and theological, it is very contradicting book to the other canonical Gospels. Okay, outside religions. Well, just all religions could be wrong. But the whole important thing, what you need to do when you bring this argument, what about the other religions? Just because I believe that Islam is wrong, that doesn't make me a Christian. That doesn't make me an atheist. I'm just going to show that the Islam religion doesn't hold water in reality. So if we want to bring our religions into play, we're going to have to look at what they are claiming. For example, if how much longer do I have, Scotty, so I can address this issue with the religions?
One more minute. You got
How many?
1 minute. Almost 1
Okay,
minute.
let me explain something. For example, Islam. Islam is a one-man claim, which is unverifiable. The claim of Jesus Christ is not claimed by himself. Remember the philosopher that Bruce Lee said? Somebody asked me, "Am I good?" And what did Bruce Lee say? If I tell you that I'm good, you're gonna believe that I'm boasting. He said, "Ask my friend how good I am, and you're really gonna know how badass I am." So which is better, self-proclamation or what your eyewitnesses who have seen you? So I believe that every other religion's gotta defend themselves in a better way than Islam, because Islam is a one-man claim. He dictated the Quran, so there's no way for me to falsify it. But this, when a man comes to you, Mr. B, and tells you, "I will die and I will bodily resurrect," that's one hell of a claim. The enemies, his family, anybody, they could easily destroy the resurrection if they saw these disciples preaching a bodily resurrection. They could say, "Wait a minute, they're liars. That's impossible. Go look at the tomb." That's why the myth is saying that the body could have been thrown somewhere else. No, Joseph Arimathea was an enemy. So when he put him in the tomb, there was a seal of the Roman guard saying, "Whoever goes in there, they break in the law." They didn't believe he was going to rise. Nobody believed him. Remember, what changed the mind of me? Okay.
That's time. Okay, Brian, you heard rebuttal. So you take the floor, man. You've got 5 minutes to rebut Victor here.
Man, that's a lot right there, let me tell you. The problem is with a lot of that, Victor, is that you say Jesus made these claims, but I don't know that. You don't know that. You've got that written in a book from authors that you don't know who the heck they are. Maybe we could start there, because the scholarly consensus is that Mark was the original gospel. Matthew and Luke copied Mark and added to him, and then of course John was separate. There's really good arguments for that, and I don't think either one of us really want to go that far into it. But they were late. Even if we say Mark was set, in the 70s, that's kind of stretching it. But as far as Matthew and Luke copying it, there's really not much question about that. They use the same words, they use the same phrases, word for word in places. One of the clues is they do everything in the same order. If me and you are telling a story that we were eyewitnesses to, the order would be different. But you can pull Mark right out of Matthew and Luke. I don't think this really is very contested. The Gospels were not really even known until late 2nd century. They were circulated without names on them. A lot of apologists like to say, well, they never had different names. These always had these names. Well, they didn't always have those names. They were circulated anonymously first. So a lot of what we're talking about is you taking that book literally as history, and that's actually what I'm contesting. Things like, let me see, where we were here. Sorry. Okay. with Matthew being a tax collector and Luke being a physician? We have no idea about that. None whatsoever. These are mostly church myths. The one gospel does say that he saw Matthew at the tax collector's booth. He didn't say he was running it. He didn't say he was a tax collector. He was sitting there at the booth. Maybe he was a tax collector, maybe not. That'd be a good character in the story, because that's what they're doing, is developing stories. The idea that Luke was some physician is even worse. Apologists like to say he used medical terms. That's really stretching it. He's just a character in the story, and he's not doing anything medical. That's really a stretch. These gospels were written long after these people were dead, and after the legends had developed. The empty tomb, you kind of go back to that quite a bit. Well, they could have pointed to the empty tomb. Well, not if there wasn't one. I mean, we could even say if there was one. We don't know when the disciples started preaching. It wasn't the next day. They had all run away. Evidently, they were either supposed to stay there or meet Jesus in Galilee, depending on what gospel you read. But they didn't go out the next day and start preaching. So even if there was a tomb, nobody was going to go look in there until well after it was too late. 2 weeks later, the body's too decomposed to even identify. So we're on two levels there. Even if the story is true, which it probably isn't, it really wouldn't help the case, whatsoever. Talking about Arithemia was an enemy. We don't know that. We don't know anything except that he was a character in a book, which we shouldn't believe anyway. We have no physical evidence, and every piece of physical evidence we have says that somebody crucified for insurrection, which Jesus was hung on a cross until they died and then thrown into an open grave. That's, so what are we to believe? Some cult members that we don't know, we can identify, that definitely were not eyewitnesses themselves. That seems kind of scant to me.
All right. Well, that's time for the rebuttal. So did we want to do a cross-examination, or did we want to get right into an open discussion?
I think this is good enough that we can get into a discussion. I think if you agree, Mr. B, I'll ask one question and you'll ask one question.
I mean, we could do that, or I'm really interested in digging down deeper into some of your points.
Okay, yeah. So let's do.
If you'd like, maybe take it point by point.
Yeah. So we'll do
awesome.
the discussion, Scotty.
Okay.
If you think.
Sounds good. All right. So what point did you want to bring up first, Victor?
Let's talk about. You were asking about, are they late? Or the gospel's late? Or why the names? Which one would you like to discuss? Go ahead, Mr. B. Go ahead, because I got the affirmative, so I can answer those questions if you'd like.
Well, I mean, the scholarly consensus, and this is among Christian scholars also, not apologists, but scholars.
Right.
Mark probably written in the 70s, Matthew 80s, 90s. John could be as late as early 2nd century. We really don't know. They've got the fragment of P52. They claim was
sorry. When do you think?
I'm sorry.
When do you think John was written?
The scholarly consensus is right at the end of the 1st century, but it could be as late as early 2nd century. They've got the fragment P52. They say it was written in 125. There's no way anybody knows that. It could be written anywhere from the end of the 1st century to the end of the 2nd century.
Okay, I can answer that question. Okay, so let us assume, right? Let's go by that route. Let us assume that the gospel were written late. Okay, the late would be, so we'll put Mark at 70. We'll put Matthew at where? 75, 80. We'll put Luke. Luke cannot be farther than 70. Because Luke was at the time of Paul. He was the scribe of Paul. And Paul didn't die around 65 before 70. So he was around there. Now, John was written on the year 95. So let us assume, Mr. Brian, that this gospel were late. Well, how do you answer the 12 creeds that are, there's about 10 creeds. way, way earlier than the Gospels that are backing up the Gospels. Even if the Gospels are unreliable, you have First Corinthians that was written 20 years later after the event, which all scholarly consensus, like you said, hey, they agreed that this must have been written 5 years later. This creed, I'm sorry, the early creed started 5 years later. If you look it up, if you have a moment right now to look it up, how early is the First Corinthians written? They say it even as early as the 30th AD. So even if the Gospels are unreliable to give us accurate information about Jesus, you still have early attestation. Also Galatians is a way early attestation creed. If you read Galatians, he says, I went back 12 or 13 years later to make sure that what I have been preaching wasn't in vain. And he said, Peter and James, or was it John? He says they added nothing to me. So even if the Gospels are unreliable, you still have multiple attestation. Also, it is arguably in all scholar consensus that legends are being built. Legends are start coming on after 100 to 150 years later.
Okay, I'm going to have to disagree with that strongly.
Now, I didn't say that though.
Legends can pop up overnight. I mean,
yeah, but what's the motive?
For all different motives, but basically,
no. Yeah, but you have to have a good motive. There's only remember that you put a video about J. Warner Wallace. Remember that video?
Right.
Okay, now that's a detective of homicide detective, and I like what he said. He says, "What were the motives of the disciples to make up a myth?"
See, that's the wrong question, because I never said that they made up a myth.
Okay.
I believe that they believe that Jesus Christ rose from the grave.
Okay, so how is it a legend?
Well, the Mormons believe that Joseph Smith found golden plates, that an angel appeared and gave him golden plates.
Well, I understand that, but I can answer that question for you too, for other religions, but I want you to explain to me. Okay, so the disciples really did believe. You agreeing with me?
Well, sure.
And the reason, but
all cults believe in their leaders.
Right, but here's the huge difference.
The Heaven Gates people, they believed that. They believed enough to kill themselves.
I totally agree, but here's where I disagree. But that doesn't hold water with the Gospels and with the attestation of the resurrection. And I'll explain to you why. Number one, okay, none of the disciples believed Jesus who was claiming to be. If they were making up a lie, they would have to get together and say, hey, guys, guess what? Let's make up a lie. Let's make up a whole new religion, and we're going to die for it. Who would die for a lie?
Okay, again, Victor, I don't think they were lying. They're not going to sit down and say a lie. They were mistaken. They mistakenly believed that Jesus rose. Just like the Heaven's Gate people mistakenly believed that they were going to be carted off to some UFO. Just as the Mormons, they have 8 eyewitnesses that saw the golden plates. 4 of them saw the angel Moroni, saw him. These are eyewitnesses. Christians don't even have eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses totally attesting to that. Why don't you believe them?
Okay, I'll tell you what I do believe then. Okay, what did Joseph Smith did when he was spreading his Mormonism? You know what he did? He gathered his people from New York to leave because they kill him. So you have a motive there that doesn't go along with the story. Check this out. The disciples of Jesus did not run away, even though they knew they were facing death. They stayed in Jerusalem. In the book of Acts, it is written, they said they were preaching the gospel and the resurrection in the Pentecost. They didn't run away for what they knew and believed and saw that was true. So here's my question. What was the motive of the disciples? You already agreed that they believed what they saw. But listen, the only reason that they changed their mind was because they saw the risen Jesus. Remember, Thomas, what he said in John chapter 20. He said this, if I don't touch Jesus, I am not going to believe in him. Jesus appeared to them, not just one person, appeared to them in groups. And it goes, touch right here, insert your finger right here. So right there and then we have a good reason to believe, like you said, that they did saw the risen Jesus. There's no motive. Listen, there's 3 motives that people lie for something: money, power, and sex. I'm not going to lie to die. If I'm going to build a cult, I'm not going to lie to die, though. There's no, plus there is no outside evidence that they would lie. They all said,
No,
look,
yeah,
look
there's no
how.
outside evidence of anything.
Oh yes, there is there outside. Josephus, Tacitus, Clement of Rome, all of these attested on. But
Okay, let me address that if I can, because we've been through this. We have, you could name what, 4 or 5 more historians, and what do they tell us? They don't tell us about the disciples. They don't tell us about Thomas, that he had to, put his finger in the hole. He doesn't say anything. All they
what
say,
do you mean?
all,
No, wait. I don't understand.
all the historians say that Jesus Christ was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and people started believing them.
Exactly.
They don't attest to any miracles. In fact, Tacitus calls Christianity a mischievous superstition.
Okay, let me address that.
He
Let me
said,
address that. Yeah, before I
well,
forget, let me address that.
okay, well,
Okay, so
he was closer to it than us, and he didn't believe that Jesus rose from the dead.
okay,
But
the
all the
Talmud.
historians that you give me are just saying what I agree with. Jesus Christ was a preacher. He was crucified and he was killed. Now, after that,
Okay,
we all diverge, but that's all the historians attest to.
okay. Now let's talk about the miracle issue. Okay, the miracle issue. What about the Talmud? What was the response of the Talmud concerning the resurrection of Jesus? He says, "Look at that guy." I don't remember verbatim what they said, but here's what they said. Listen, they crucified their Christ, that witchcraft, or that how do you call that warlock? They call him a warlock, that he was doing miracles
Sorcerer.
by evil, by
Mhm.
sorcery.
Yeah.
That is attestation of a miracle. They knew he was making miracles, and what they call it was a sorcery. So yes, it is outside the Gospels attested that the Talmuds are attesting that Jesus did perform miracles.
Okay.
Now,
The problem.
but listen,
Okay. Go ahead.
here's my question that I have, Mr. B. We have no evidence that they would lie for. We have no logical conclusion that these guys would die for a lie. Listen to what the Gospel of John, the third book, says. Listen to what he says. He says, that which have touched, we have seen, we have eaten with. The disciples spent 40 days and 40 nights with Jesus. That's not hallucination. They know what they were dying for. I agree with you. People will die for what they think is true. They were dying because they saw the body. They saw the body risen of Jesus Christ. So
See, that's the story. That's what the
I
story
know
says.
that's the story. That's why we're doing an internal critique.
Okay.
This is called
So,
an internal critique.
well, I mean, if we want to do an internal critique, we should go, for some contradictions, things like that. I don't see why we need an internal critique. There's
Well, okay, I'll tell you what.
The external
To help
evidence
you
is
out,
plenty.
okay, let's do Muslim.
Mhm.
Let's do the Islam religion in contrast to Christianity.
Why don't we do Sai Baba?
Sai Baba, because
Your favorite.
because okay, Sai Baba's story is so huge. I'm more familiar with Islam because with Islam I can dissect it with you because there's an atheist who turned Islam.
Oh yeah.
You remember that, Scotty?
I know
You remember that debate?
Yeah.
So I want to hit him hard and give me that Muslim metaphysician too. So okay, what?
All right, convince me that Islam's not a true religion. Go.
Let's stress why. Okay. Okay. Fact one. They say Muhammad claims, okay, that he is the promised prophet of the Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 18 or 19, I believe. Now check this out. Jehovah, Yahweh, with his own mouth said, whoever claims to be a prophet of mine, if he says something, and if he doesn't comes out, that means he's a liar. That's the claim in Deuteronomy chapter 18 and 19. That if somebody claims to be a prophet and he prophesies something and that prophecy doesn't come true, then guess what? That prophet is lying. Okay, that right there is the key to know if the prophet Muhammad was a prophet of the Old Testament. So when he went to the Jews, what did the Jews requested? Okay, Muhammad, if you are a prophet of the Old Testament, what is your evidence? what was the response of Muhammad? He said the Quran is my evidence. But they were like, wait a minute, how can the Quran be your evidence if he was the only one dictating the Quran? That's called circular reasoning. Why is the Quran true? Because Muhammad said it. Why is Muhammad's word true? Because the Quran says it. So we have a circular reasoning, an internal critique that I'm doing. Another, okay? What we see here is that he never performed miracles. Another key factor. He didn't even know who was telling him what. After the cave, okay, he went to Khadijah, his wife, of 44 years old. He was 25 years old at the time. Khadijah was the one who told him, listen, that is Allah trying to talk to you through the angel Gabriel. It is written that for 22 years before getting into dictating the Quran, Muhammad was suicidal. He didn't know what to believe. So you see, I'm not saying that Islam is false because Christianity says it's false, but what I see when he makes these claims, he didn't back him up.
So
he didn't back him up.
So what you're saying, let me see if I get this straight. What you're saying is that just because a character in a book like Muhammad claims that they are a prophet from God, or claims any supernatural claims, that book is not adequate evidence to believe the story.
No.
Is that right?
No, what I'm reading, when you read the biography of Muhammad, okay, when you read the biography of Muhammad, Muhammad, in his biography, he proclaims to be the prophet of the Old Testament, okay? But he didn't fulfill the recipe to be a prophet. And what do I mean by that? Well, Deuteronomy chapter 18 or 19, I can't remember, okay? Because, I wasn't prepared for Islam, but I do remember these arguments. And here's the argument that if you're gonna claim that you're a prophet of the Old Testament, you have to prove it. That if you prophesy something, if it comes true, that means God helped you with it. But if you don't make any claims and you just call yourself, anybody can claim themselves a prophet, but you would have to prove it. You have to give evidence if you are a prophet. So what I'm saying is, I don't believe the Quran because it is a sole dictation of Muhammad. There is no way to verify that what he's saying comes really from Allah. I just have to take his word for it. So you see the difference?
No.
In Christianity, we see multiple attestation. But in Islam, all I got to do is just take Muhammad's word, and I can't do that. Okay, another thing that I don't...
Okay, so
go ahead.
So the number of witnesses is important then. Muhammad has one. Jesus has what? Paul, Mark. Let's give him Matthew, Luke, John. So he's got 5. We got 5 sources for the miracles of Jesus.
No.
So,
what's important is that...
No. That you're making a distinction there.
Right, but not of eyewitnesses. The way you're phrasing it doesn't sound correct. What I'm asking you is this. Okay, let me give you an analogy. If I tell you that I'm a prophet of God, and you read the Old Testament, and you said to me, hey, Victor, if you are the prophet of the Old Testament, it says here on Deuteronomy 18 and 19 that you're supposed to perform what prophets will come true. What are you going to prophet to show me that you are a prophet?
Okay, so
if I tell you, so check this out. If I tell you, well, I wrote this book and it testifies that I am the prophet, would you believe me?
Of course not. Let me ask you, if the Quran has said that Muhammad had performed miracles, would you believe him?
Well, no, because he's dictating it.
What's the difference?
The difference is that there is no... Okay, here's the difference.
Let's just say, for example, things were different, and in the Quran it said Muhammad performed all these miracles.
Right.
Would that make them true? Would you believe the story then?
No, because he is dictating the Quran. Okay, let me explain it to you again. Wait. Let me explain it to you again. If I'm writing this book, if I'm dictating this book word for word, and in this book it says Victor is the prophet of the Old Testament, This cannot be my evidence because I'm writing it. I'm going to write it to my benefit. So when we read the biography of Muhammad and we read, he said he solely dictated. I've debated many Muslims. They say Muhammad is the sole dictator of the Quran.
Okay, so
right?
we have one witness. We have one witness, and we don't believe the stories. Okay, so for the Gospels, you got 5 not eyewitnesses, anonymous people telling stories.
How do you know that?
Because that's what it is. I mean, that's what it is. At least that at the minimum. At the minimum, it's a story.
No. But how do you know they were anonymous?
Because that's what the scholarship says. I mean,
okay,
we could do a whole different debate on that. Okay, but it's pretty well.
No, we'll fix it right now. We'll fix it right now. Check this out. Right? Why? This is the case that Richard Bauckham, Michael Licona, Craig Blomberg go against Bart Ehrman. At one point, Bart Ehrman says, okay, that the New Testament is historically reliable. At another point, you're going to find Bart Ehrman making great arguments against it. But you and me right here, let's work it out because we have the evidence right there in the internet that we can discuss this. Okay, check this out. You have Mark, the scribe of Peter. You have Luke, the physician. He was not an eyewitness. Okay, but Matthew and John were the disciples of Jesus. So let me ask you this. If this was a lie, why didn't it say the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of let's say, Andrew, the Gospel, instead of naming it Luke, why didn't they name of one of the disciples if this was a lie?
I thought Luke was a disciple.
No, Luke was the disciple of Paul. He was the scribe of Paul. But Luke, why is the Gospel of Luke respected? Because he says this, it has been written, many have written accounts, but I came back to investigate, to make sure to you, dear Theophilus, that what you have heard, it is true. That's why it is very well accepted. Luke was a physician who came back to investigate whether that was true or was not, whether it was attested. So why didn't they name that gospel? My question to you is, right? So if this was a lie, why not pick one of the names of the disciples? Why make up another name?
Why not?
Why not? Because that means they were being honest of what they saw. That's what that means. Because listen, when you say anonymous, that's an argument from Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman makes an argument that we don't know who wrote the Gospels, right?
That's not an argument from Bart Ehrman. That is well accepted scholarship by Christian scholars.
Name some.
Oh God. Okay. Thanks, man. All right. You want me to Google it right now for you?
No, okay. But listen to the point I'm making, though. But listen.
No, listen to my point here. Okay, let's grant it. Okay, let's grant Mark, Matthew, Luke, John wrote the Gospels. We'll grant that just for the sake of argument. Who were they? Why should I believe them? What did they really know?
Who were they? Okay, let me answer that question.
How do I know Mark was the scribe of Peter? I don't. How do I know Luke was a physician?
Because it
was in the story, right? You're talking about circular arguments. The only way that we know or think that Luke was some physician was because that's in the story.
No, that's not it. That's not an.
If you guys at any point need me to pull up some sources for you because you guys are engaged, I can do that for you. Like I pulled up the consensus about the Gospels according to most.
All right.
Yeah. So what is the consensus, Scott, among Christian scholars?
All right. So I'll read it from the. Encyclopedia Britannica. It says here that the scholarly consensus is that they are the work of unknown Christians and were composed between 68 AD and 110 AD. The majority of New Testament scholars agree that the Gospels do not contain eyewitness accounts. That's what that source says. Let me see. Wikipedia pretty much says the same thing verbatim. So anyways, and then we've got the Brisbane Catholic Education that says, let's see, what does the Catholic Bible say? It says,
I'm thinking.
let me just pull it up.
I'm thinking the Catholics admit it also.
Yeah, well, let's see. The authorship of the gospel, which bears the name of Matthew, is uncertain. It is generally accepted that the author is not the apostle Matthew, according to the church. Luke, the authorship of the gospel, which bears the name of Luke, is also uncertain, according to the church. John, the authorship of the gospel, which bears the name of John, remains a mystery. Irenaeus, who wrote at the end of the 2nd century, identified the apostle John with the evangelist John, who came later, and others speculated that the gospel was written by the disciple of John, the apostle, according to church tradition. So there you have it.
Okay. What about Richard Bauckham?
Who?
Richard Bauckham.
The apologist.
Is that okay?
He's a scholar.
So
He's
what's
a
his
scholar?
Richard
So-
Bauckham?
Okay.
So he's in the minority. Okay, he's a scholar. Great. He's in the
Oh
minority.
no. What about NT? I got listen. NT Wright, Bruce Metzger, Craig Klumber.
You sure about NT Wright?
What?
Are you
Bruce
sure?
Metzger? You doubting Bruce Metzger?
It's been a while since I've checked my apologist, but I don't know if any of those people. I'm not.
Yeah, but
I'm
listen.
not.
I mean,
I'm not sure that any of those would claim that the Gospels were written by the authors that their names are attached to.
Richard Buchan does. He debated Bart Ehrman on it.
All right. So did you want me to look at what Richard Bauckham said?
Yeah.
All right. So looking at Richard Bauckham, he says Bauckham argues that the synoptic gospels are based quite closely on the testimony of eyewitnesses, and the gospel John is written by an eyewitness, but not John.
Okay.
So not so.
Well,
conclusive.
like I said before, there is an argument between John the disciple and John the elder. That's the argument. That's why they say it's uncertain, but is it certain that it was John the disciples? I mean, like I said, this was a long topic, and the whole debate format went sideways. But if you want to raise questions while I look that up,
honestly, that is a debate in itself. I mean, which
yes, it is, and we can prepare for the next one.
That
But-
might be good, because I'd kind of like to get back to some of your other points.
Yeah.
Okay,
let's
go
to the
ahead.
next one. Yep.
The legends in 1 Corinthians. Okay, 1 Corinthians, we don't know how early, but it could be as early as 3 years.
Okay.
It could be, but
Okay, if it's early as 3 years, so can that be a legend?
of course it could.
How?
It could be a legend in a month. It was
Okay, well, give me an example. How can it be a legend?
I don't know, Sata Sai Baba, the Mormons, Heaven's Gate.
No.
Elvis
What I'm
Presley,
trying to tell you is, my question is
what you're
this.
trying to say is it's going to take a long time for these legends to develop, but you really can't tell me why that is. Legends develop like wildfire.
No, I can tell you why. Listen, Mr. B, the reason this cannot be a legend is because it was all historical consensus. He can look that up. Listen, the reason it cannot be a legend, it is because it is too close to the event. 3 years to become something a legend?
Why
You're
not?
saying that Paul's credo is 3 years after the event. That's impossible because listen, here's my question to you now. Let me ask you one question because I know I have this point, but I got a point to ask you. What's the motive for them to lie? What reasons do they have for them to lie?
Did you want me
It
to?
doesn't hold water.
Victor.
Listen, their motive was death.
Okay, Victor, let me try to say it as clearly as possible because we've gone over this on the internet.
Yeah.
They were not lying. They were mistaken.
But what mistake did they do?
Just like the followers of Satya Sai Baba, they're not lying; they are mistaken. Satya Sai
Okay,
Baba didn't
okay.
perform any
Let's
miracles,
do your Sai
but
Baba. Let's do your Sai
but his
Baba.
eyewitnesses believed that. No, let's stay with witnesses. They
Okay.
believed that. You know, it. He was still alive when those legends were developed. You,
Who?
you, Satya Sai Baba.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Jesus.
Okay, he was still alive, and there were thousands of people proclaiming his miracles all over the
His
world.
resurrections and yeah.
They weren't lying;
Yeah.
they were mistaken.
Okay.
Heaven's Gate. They believe.
Okay, but wait. How were they lying against Sai Baba though?
They were not lying. They were mistaken.
Okay, but what mistake did they do? How were they mistaken? That's what I.
They believed that he performed miracles. They believed
Okay.
that he raised people from the dead.
Okay, did he?
I don't think so, but they did.
Okay, well, how do you know he didn't?
I don't know. Do you think he did?
I'm asking you. You brought Sai Baba.
mean-
That's why I told you I can't really
I mean,
make an argument
well,
for him because.
Okay, my personal opinion is
Okay.
that eyewitness testimony is not sufficient evidence for resurrections. They, you know, that is so far outside of the physical possibilities. I'm not saying it's impossible. Could be possible, but the eyewitness testimony, especially of a dedicated religious group, is not sufficient.
Okay.
Okay, you have to admit that, right? You don't believe Satya Sai Baba raised the dead, do you?
Well, I would have to see. I got to do an internal. I got to read the story and I got to see. Well, because listen, hold on. Because wait a minute. We still haven't covered near-death experience yet. But hold on. Hey, I know a scholar determinist. I know a scholar determinist meat robot. Scotty Williamson admitted that MDE stories are possible. But wait.
Well, NDE.
Let me see this. Let's go with the eyewitness.
Well, NDEs
The reason that I believe that an eyewitness is invalid when they got a motive to it. For example, let me give you an example. Okay. If we find a motive behind what, for example, Christians today, right? The Jim Jones story. Okay. The Jim Jones story. When you read the whole story, they had a whole bunch of witnesses that they were claiming that Jim Jones was for real, right? When the whole story was discovered, we find out that the eyewitnesses were liars. There were a lot of people that were helping Jim Jones perform miracles. They were pretending to be sick. Just like many times today, they have discovered Benny Hinn to be a liar. What did they do? They went and investigated Benny Hinn, what they were doing. The real sick people, they were setting them aside. The people who were supposed to perform to be sick, they were letting them pass by, and they were claiming that they were missing. But you see, we can see, Mr. Brian, that these people are lying. That's why I can't really.
5 more minutes.
Okay.
To go to the next part. Yeah.
Okay. So if I see the story and if I read the story of Sai Baba and I take my time and read it, I can make an argument of why is it true, why is it not. But you see,
but you're saying that eyewitness testimony is insufficient to believe in the resurrection.
No,
on its own.
I think the resurrection. No, the eyewitnesses of the resurrection is way valid. It is verifiable. It is falsifiable, and yet.
Okay, that's your new thing.
No, I'll explain it. Because listen,
how are you going to verify it and how are you going to falsify it?
Okay, here's the claim. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. He meant a bodily resurrection. Mr. Brian, that is the easiest thing to do. All they had to do was present the body. That's it.
But there was no body. Why would I believe?
Of course, Jesus had risen. That's why.
No, because there was no tomb. His body was in a mass.
What do you mean there's no tomb? There's even a tour in Jerusalem where the tomb was found.
No, there's 3 tombs in Jerusalem.
Oh, but there was a tomb.
There's 3 because that's because the Christians decided, the Catholics decided he was buried here, the Protestants decided he was buried there, and now some archaeologists have found something that shows his body is buried in a grave. So no Christian wants to believe that. Anybody can Stevens was buried.
Huh?
They didn't. Nobody
You
knew
kind
where it was.
of the video kind of
Yeah.
slowed down. I'm sorry. Say what?
Nobody knew where his grave was until Constantine's mother came. What was it, Helena? And she
Okay.
came by.
All right. Let's go with that argument.
And somebody said, "Here it was."
Okay. Let's go with that argument. Let's say they didn't know where the tomb was. How do you explain the conversion of Paul? Who did he see?
Okay. Paul did not see a tomb, right?
Okay. No tomb.
He didn't see. He never met Jesus. He didn't.
Yes, he did.
No, he didn't. Okay,
Mr. Brian, that's what I'm trying to tell. Wait. Here's my question again.
No, he had a vision of Christ. That
no,
is different.
He's not. That's
Jesus.
not a vision. I'm explaining to you why it's not a vision. Read the creeds. That's not a vision.
Okay.
He saw the reason. Listen, if he had it, why would he have a vision? What is the motive?
He doesn't have a motive.
Do you think he's going to have a vision of somebody that he doesn't like?
Why not? Especially if it was a guilt vision.
Why would he be guilty if he thinks he's doing the right thing?
Because he's walking down the road in the hot sun, and he hadn't eaten in a while, and he hadn't had much to drink, and he's thinking, man, I've just been really beating the crap out of those people, and those damn Christians just seem so sincere, and man, this is a crap job.
Wait.
All of a sudden, bam! Oh, I hear a voice. He didn't even see Jesus. He heard a voice.
There is no evidence that where in the Gospels or where in the Pauline letters does it said he had a guilty conscience for killing the Christian when he thought he was doing the right thing. There is no evidence for that. That doesn't hold water. He saw the reason Jesus.
There's more evidence that he had some type of fit.
No, there is no evidence for that because
there's more evidence for that than that he actually saw a vision.
All right, we're going to get into the next portion.
All right,
this will be the Q.
I'm sorry. You're on mute, Scotty. I can't hear you. Okay.
He's going to take some questions, I think.
Oh, okay.
Is anybody even watching this?
I can't tell. If I exit out, I'm going to disturb the whole.
41 people watching this.
Sorry, I had to take a work phone call. But okay, so we're going to get into the next portion. I don't have too many questions. I have one though from Richard Hall.
Yeah. Oh man.
This is probably for Victor.
Yeah.
What evidence supports the claims found in the gospel?
Repeat that again.
What evidence supports the claims found in the Gospels?
What evidence supports the claims found in the Gospel?
That's what he asked.
Outside attestation, the early creeds, 1 Corinthians, Galatians, the attestation of Josephus.
No, not Josephus, not Josephus.
Yes, it is. I have it right here. Josephus wrote about Wait.
I mean, you agree that at least part of that is a forgery, right?
What's a forgery?
Part of Josephus, at least.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you this then. Just to follow up on what Richard Hall
because part about Josephus, but I'm talking about the general terminology. Yeah.
So Richard is asking what evidence supports the claims found in the gospel, and you mentioned Josephus. So can you pull up, can you answer from Josephus, can you quote where he mentioned that the resurrection was in fact historical? Where is that found at?
Jeez.
I can pull it up
where the reason is mentioned where he says, the Christians, the evil sect, something like that. I don't have it in hand.
But
okay. I've got the North American Mission Board, which is a Christian source. I don't know if this is good. It's an evangelical, but let's see what it says here at any rate. Let's see. So Antiquities 18, verse 63. About this time lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was the achiever of extraordinary deeds and was a teacher of those who accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Messiah. When he was indicted by the principal men among us and Pilate condemned him to be crucified, those who had come to love him originally did not cease to do so, for he appeared to them on the third day, restored to life, as the prophets of the deity had foretold these and countless other marvelous things about him. And the tribe of Christians, so named after him, has not disappeared to this day. This particular verse is in question, though, it says.
Yeah, the reason is question because it is way you could tell they're saying, you know, about Jesus being foretold and all of that. But yeah, but the general what I learned to remember was that, hey, this is the guy that is being worshipped as deity, but they got it on an attestation. So yeah, there is attestation outside the Fourth Gospels and the early creeds. Because see,
it's also good to say that his book, The Antiquities, was written well after most of the disciples had already died, like in the 2nd century. So
yeah,
he wasn't really a contemporary of Jesus himself. So I guess what he did is he went back and did some research into some stuff that happened the previous, century or whatever. But anyways, you guys continue. I just wanted to help.
Well, I mean, it's pretty well secured that portion is a forgery. I mean, he was a Jew. He would never call Jesus the Messiah.
Yes, that's
right?
exactly.
Would, right? He never would.
I agree with that.
But there's enough there that scholarly consensus here is that Josephus testified that Jesus existed. So, as far as Jesus, a man, that's good evidence. Same as Tacitus, Seneca, Pliny. A lot of people can attest that that man lived and died, that we can believe that. But for the miracle stories, there's nothing. We're talking about Josephus. He wrote a complete history of the Jews. He wrote a biography of Herod. And as far as Herod's life, he documented every murder that Herod committed. His kids, his wife, his enemies, his friends. I mean, this guy was a horrible guy. But one story that wasn't in there was the slaughter of the innocents.
Okay, what about the Talmud?
Okay, the Talmud, I'm glad we got back to that because the Talmud doesn't even talk about Jesus of Nazareth.
Yes, he does. He said he was a word.
When was the Talmud written, Victor?
I don't recall. See, I'm remembering these things, man, because I prepared differently. But since we came to agree like this, I remember the Talmud's calling him a sorcerer. Can you look for that, Scotty?
Yeah, I've got it right here. So I'm pulling up again Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica. The Talmud is is based on rabbinic Judaism. It's the primary source of the religious law, the halakha, and Jewish theology. This was written in 500, so the 4th century.
So very late.
It does write about how it does refer to Christianity as a devil worship.
Exactly, but does it say
you'd expect
that? But
yeah, I'm not sure that's in the Talmud. Isn't it? That's one of the.
No, the Talmud calls him a sorcery, that he works miracles by sorcery.
Yeah, so here's the problem with the Talmud. All right, they do mention Yeshu. Here, let me just read this one. The identification of Jesus with any number of individuals named Yeshu has numerous problems, as most of the individuals are said to have lived in time periods far detached from that of Jesus. Yeshu, the sorcerer, is noted for being executed by the Hossonian government, which lost legal authority in 63 BC. So even that's way before Jesus. And of course, the other ones are way after Jesus. So just because somebody's named Yeshu doesn't mean that's Yeshu of Nazareth. and none of these
No, what?
and none of these
No,
people
what? Wait,
none of
wait,
these
wait, wait,
people
wait,
would have
wait.
fit the time
Why would they address Jesus as a sorcerer? So
because
what you're
because
asking, wait a minute, but here's the argument though. Um, the argument is the following: that did he perform miracles? Your question was, did he perform miracles? Were they
that's not my
by them
question.
calling Jesus a sorcerer that he worked miracle, but as a sorcerer, that still confirmed that he worked miracles, even if you call him a sorcerer. That's the
Well,
argument. I'm
well,
not
okay,
arguing. I'm not
well,
arguing the reliability of the Talmud. That's not my argument. Your question was,
okay,
well, did Jesus perform miracles? Yes, he did.
okay. So here's the problem with that: the Jesus, the sorcerer that they're talking about, could not have lived any earlier than 63 BC.
Say that again.
That Jesus could not have lived any earlier than 63 BC. So
Which
that
Jesus?
Jesus, the sorcerer in the Talmud.
I don't know.
Well,
I don't know, but because the only Jesus they're addressing to, according to what I've studied, is that they're addressing the issues of Jesus Christ.
well, that's what apologists say, but they have no good reason for that because every mention of Jesus in the Talmud refers to somebody that was either born way before Jesus of Nazareth or way after Jesus
Well,
of Nazareth.
I'll give you that point, Mr.
So,
B. I'll give you that point, but here's the thing. They call him this Jesus a miracle worker, even if you call him a sorcerer.
who's
I'll
that?
give you that
Who,
point.
who calls him that?
Huh? The Talmud.
Now, the Talmud didn't call Jesus of Nazareth that.
Okay, but they call him
It-
some. You're saying that, okay? Like I said, I'll grant you some Jesus, but
yeah.
they saying that he was a miracle worker by sorcery. No.
Yep. Back in 63 BC.
Okay, so there are miracles being performed out there.
Well, that's what they believe.
Exactly. You
All right,
raised the question
here's
of
another
miracle.
question by Mike Holt. I got to kind of
Yeah,
rush this along
Yeah,
a
let's
little
get
bit,
some
but I
Q and
just got
A's. Let's get some
called.
Q and A's.
yeah.
Mike Holt asks, does Victor think it is irrational to hold the position that dead things don't come back to life?
So he thinks if I'm being irrational to hold
He's
that.
asking, does Victor think it is irrational to hold a position or believe that dead things do not come back to life? Is that irrational to believe that once you're like, if my aunt died, would you say I was irrational to expect her to come back to life next week, or would you just think that's normal?
It all depends. Now I'm gonna tell. Now I'm gonna jump into the NDE stories for a little bit, but I wanna tell Mike Holt this. Okay, this is why Jesus' resurrection is a miracle. There's no other way to explain it. Okay, if God exists, then Jesus was raised from the dead. The whole point of here, this is why
The
I'm trying
master
to get
apologist.
This is why I'm trying to get Mr. Brian to answer these claims. The conclusion leads that if God exists, Jesus Christ resurrected from the dead.
Oh,
Now,
by
do
no
I hold
means.
the
By no
yeah?
means.
Okay, give me 1 second. Now, if somebody comes and tell me, hey, guess what? I'm gonna die and come back to life. Man, I'll probably slap him in the head, man. It's time to take you out there. But if this person comes and say, hey, man, I died. Here's the proof. I'm back from the dead. How do you? According to the near-death experience, John Hagen III, Sam Parnia, okay, we have enough medical data from the from the University of West Virginia, from Bruce Grayson. He wrote the book Afterlife. Dr. Venpen Lamille, he wrote the book Beyond Life. Okay, there is enough medical data out there, okay, that people who were supposed to be dead, okay, came back to life. And here's the argument, Mr. Mike Holt. These people came back while being in the operation room and they were having out of body experience, and they told the atheist doctors what happened in reality. That's the argument. So what does this tell you? Now, I have to find a good story. I got it.
What it tells us is that you believe in things.
No, okay. Well, you answer
insufficient
this
evidence.
question. Wait a minute.
Because none of that's true, Victor. Come on, we've been
How do
through
you
all
know
this.
that?
Because we've researched it, both of us. You know that.
Wait a minute.
No
wait a minute. Wait a minute.
there's
Okay.
no
Okay.
documented evidence of
Wait.
any such thing.
Wait. Mr. Brian, let me ask you a question. According to all medical documentation, consciousness is a product of the brain. That's the argument from all medical doctors. In 1978, every doctor was told this: if you bring that supernatural into the operation room, you're fired. Dr. Van Lamel can attest that. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it was. They said, do not bring no religion into the medical field. That's you can look at that. I will send you the link. Say what?
I'll look that up. But what does he
Yeah,
have?
no. But wait, here.
Wait. He has authority over all the doctors in the hospitals in the United States.
Listen very clearly to my question. Dr. Van Lamel was told, do not bring the supernatural into the operation room. If you bring the supernatural in the operation room, a doctor was left without a job. Here's my question to you. You can answer this for yourself, okay? If a person is in the operation room with their eyes closed, whether in a state of coma, whether clinically dead, like they call it, hold up, and that person wakes up 2 weeks later and they tell you, listen, when you know that he was supposed to be right now when we're having this discussion, when he was supposed to be in a state of coma or clinically dead in the operation room, let me ask you this. How can that person tell you what you and I exactly talked about?
They can't, because that story that you're given, that you're taking that from, is total nonsense. She never. Listen, I'm not saying this. She never dictated anything. She said she saw her family gathered. Well, yeah, her family were gathered. She was dying. Of course they were. There's not been one documented case of anything supernatural occurring in the NDE. Not once. There's thousands of claims, and there's not one documented case. And most cases that you can actually investigate, you can see that they were just people wanting to believe. People want desperately to believe.
No. Listen, Mr. Brian.
Time.
I have all the books here. If I can show them all to you. Listen to me. I'm not going to make up a lie, and I'm not going to back up a lie. Listen to what I'm telling you. Bruce Grayson.
That's the thing, Victor. I know you're not lying.
Okay, but hold on.
You're not. I know you're mistaken.
No, but how am I mistaken? Listen, let me ask you this. Let us give an example. Let's say you have a friend in the medical room that had been in a state of coma for 2 weeks. This is my question. Had been in a state of coma for 2 weeks. Then 3 days later, wakes up and tells you everything that you did for those 2 weeks. How would you explain that?
If it happened, I'd have a hard time explaining it, but I don't believe that's ever happened.
Well, then you haven't looked at the medical records.
I have looked at it. Why don't you send me that link?
I will send you all those. You know what? I'll post it in the. I'll post it for you.
Next time we could do NDEs. How about that?
Exactly. Hey, let's do NDEs. That'd be a hell of a thing.
So let me ask you this. You know that I have a story about Satya Sai Baba that
go ahead.
That a man died. We have the man's written testimony. We have the man on videotape telling his story. He died. He was taken to the hospital. He was laid out in the hospital for almost a day. He had an out-of-body experience where he met Satya Sai Baba in the heavenly realm. And Satya Sai Baba negotiated for him to come back. And he came back into his body, and he raised up from the dead like a day later. Do you believe that man's story? And do you believe that he was out of his body and he saw Satya Sai Baba in heaven and that he was raised from the dead a day later? Do you believe that or not?
I'm kind of skeptical, and I'll explain why. Let me explain why. I'll explain why. Here's the difference between that story. Wait, hold on. The story that I tell you, the person gives you reliable evidence that only you could know, that if he was lying, you would be able to say, hey, man, I was never doing that for 2 weeks. The other one is a story that he had. How do I verify or falsify that story? Check this out. The story. No, wait. Hold on. the NDE story that I tell you, that person was in a state of coma. And the atheist doctor said this: it was impossible for that person to know, number one, that a Nike blue shoe was up there on the.
Oh, you're talking about what's her name? Wendy somebody, right? That she could see
Okay,
the
so
shoe
how
from
did
the
she know that
hospital.
shoe was on the roof?
Because you could see that shoe from her room clear as day. Because Skip,
No,
yes,
man.
no.
I'm not
See,
saying
no,
Wendy. I'm not saying
I don't.
Wendy. There was a shoe. They
It was
went to verify. I have the story.
yeah,
Bruce Grayson wrote the
right.
story.
That
I don't
may
know if
not be
it's
her
Wendy
name.
though.
Yeah, okay, it may not be her name. I can't remember her
Yeah,
name. I can look it up.
yeah. Well, I would have to, but I'm gonna send you the
That
link.
is the story. That's the story. And it went around. She could not see this shoe. She heard these. She saw that. Well, when they showed up there, you could see a shoe plain as freaking day, from outside the hospital, from in her room. She could see it from her bed.
I don't
That's
know
how
which one you're
that's
talking about, but
that's
I'll
how
send you
no,
the.
that's how these things work. Is
Wait. Right now, rationally, you see how you answer that? You see how you answer that?
I
Let's
answered it.
assume Wendy's story. Wait. You just falsify Wendy's story, but I want you to falsify. I want you to rationally explain, just like you did right now. If a person, because I'm gonna get you the links and the stories of this story, because I agree, there's extremely, extremely weird stories out there. Okay, I agree.
Ain't no doubt.
But rationally explain to me this. If consciousness is a product of the brain, if that person is in a state of coma, if that person is clinically dead, how can that person explain to you why, when you verify that the eyes were closed, she had no contact with the outside world, how can she explain to you the things that you did in reality?
See, here's the
Explain
problem.
that.
Go ahead and answer
Okay,
that, and then we have to we'll have
Yeah.
to go ahead
We'll
and
go
wrap
to our
it up.
conclusion, or we're just going to close.
I'll let me explain it real quick. You cannot
Mhm.
verify that. That is a story. That is a story that people want to believe. That's a story that people make much money off of books and movies and different deals. That's totally unverifiable. We'll do
Hey,
that one.
man.
We'll do that one next. How about that?
Yeah,
Let's do
all I
that
know
one.
is that doctors who were atheists are telling these stories, and I don't know
I
why doctors
I
who were atheists would be
I,
telling that.
I, I seriously doubt that, Victor.
Okay,
I seriously doubt.
hey, Scotty, you were gone, but me and Mr. B agreed that we want to do a debate of near-death experiences.
Okay, that'll be
If
interesting.
something,
We can definitely do that.
hey, but
But
I'll need 2 weeks to get ready for that, because that
okay,
is huge. That is
let's get it.
huge.
Let's get it. All right, man.
Yeah.
Let's do our closings. I have to unfortunately run and do work-related stuff. I'm on call this weekend, so
Oh, okay. So you want to
yeah.
go first, Mr. B, or
Sure, why not? I mean,
okay?
let me try to just keep it short. There's nothing. There's just not any real sufficient evidence for the resurrection. You really do just have the Bible stories. There's nothing external from the Bible stories, and there's no good reason to believe those stories. You've got things like the infant narrative, which is obviously taken from the Old Testament. You talk about his mother and James not believing that he was God. Well, why not? Hell, shepherds and all kind of people showed up, and there was stars and everything at his birth, and an angel told Mary that he was the son of God, and then all of a sudden they just don't believe him later on because the story is not consistent. These are just this is just a typical as every other religion. He was died. He had a small cult. They freaked out and they started believing that he had risen from the dead, and that's all it really took. That's all it took for South Sai Baba, and even less, even less for Mormonism. Look at Mormonism, just a thriving religion based on what? Well, on a little more evidence than Christianity has. So we still haven't quite got why you cannot believe those witnesses, but you can believe the gospel witnesses because the gospel stories tell you that the gospels are true. That's really what it comes down to. All the theological stuff, all the apologetics, it's just nonsense. That's all Christianity really has. And I did want to add real quick that if Jesus did not die on the cross, does not mean God does not exist. Our Jewish friends will tell you that Jesus did not fulfill the Masonic prophecies, and therefore he was not the Messiah, but they still definitely believe in God. So it's not dependent on whether Jesus is God or not.
All right. So
And
has
I
he
tend to
sold
agree
you,
with the
Victor, or
Jews.
are you going to come back with your closing, or has he sold you on that?
Of course he. Of
Oh,
course I have.
oh, okay. So, all right. So here's my closing. Here's my closing. Mr. Brian agrees Jesus existed. Okay. If some Jesus existed, why should I care about? My grandfather was named Jesus. I'm not worshiping him. Okay. So if we're going to talk about some Jesus, hey, I could tell you why should I bother with him? But the reason people bother with this guy because this guy made the greatest claim in history that he was God, and he proved it by rising from the dead. Then Mr. B argues that Paul had a guilty conscience. Go talk to Toby Sr. if he has a guilty conscience when he's telling the Christians that Jesus is not God. Nobody's going to have a guilty conscience when they believe they're doing the right thing. The reason Paul went to die proudly was because he saw the risen Jesus. Okay. Um,
We don't know how
then
Paul was
Mr.
killed,
B
right?
believes that. Then Mr. B believed that the attestation is too early. Um, I mean, that is a legend or a myth. I think that historians' consensus will tell you that history relies on eyewitnesses and how close it is to the event. And even if you deny the gospel's reliability, we still have First Corinthians 15, 3 to 7, and we still have Galatians. And we have eight more early creeds way before the gospels that attest to this. Okay. Who wrote the Gospels? I made it clear that Matthew was a tax collector, and if he was a tax collector, no Roman guard is going to hire somebody who can't write and read, especially he can't even understand numbers. So there is an argument that Matthew, the tax collector, knew how to write. We also know that Luke, the physician, was called a physician, and he was a great historian, and we could tell that he knew how to write. Okay. Um, John, the dispute is between John the disciple and John the elder, but there's still a John exists, and we have the book of John. The reason we believe that the gospel were written by whom they said they were written because it was mentioned this later by the church fathers. Okay, the church fathers mentioned all the gospel names. Also, okay, the argument of who wrote the gospel, why not pick the disciple's name? That would make it stronger. Why pick Luke? Look at the book of Hebrews. Nobody know who wrote the book of Hebrews. Yet, why didn't they lie about that? They could easily put any name, but they didn't because they were writing what they saw and they were being honest about it. Okay. You also um you also wanted to know about the other gospels and outside religions. Well, let us assume all religions could be wrong.
Oh yeah. Oh
That
yeah. We
doesn't
can agree to
disprove
that.
if Christianity is false, that doesn't mean Islam is true.
That's
If
correct.
Islam and Christianity is false, that doesn't mean the Baha'i religion is true. The reason I'm telling you this because another religion doesn't disprove another religion. Okay, so the reason I still believe in Jesus Christ is for the following. I wasn't the arguments that you bring didn't answer none of this. For example, the major uh, the major question is why do we have Christianity today? How do you explain that? There is no other logical explanation because then rather than Jesus rise from the dead. Even when I'm looking at all these debates, they will tell you if you want to kill the snake, you got to hit the head. And if you disprove the resurrection, if you give a logical argument against the resurrection, okay, I will personally burn the Bible because let me tell you this: for me to worry about some Jesus, why should I bother? Okay, look at the book of Isaiah. Isaiah I love the book of Isaiah, but you don't see me worshiping Isaiah. I love the book of the five books of Moses. I don't worship Moses, but the reason we love this Jesus is because he proved who he was claiming to be. That listen, Mr. B, the falsification was very simple. No one believed who Jesus was. The enemies, instead of saying the body's in the tomb, we throw it away. Here's where we throw it away. They could easily say or point where the body was. Instead, they
Yep,
said
yep.
that disciples stole the body. And if that disciples stole the body, Mr. Brian, why were they preaching the gospel in the day of Pentecost? And the reason, even though being in Jerusalem, what happened? They started being persecuted. Nobody's going to die for a lie. I agree with you when you tell me, oh, people can believe anything. Yes, people can believe anything. But the reason these hold water is because of the way they wrote. They said, that which we have seen, we have touched, we preach to you that God
All right.
raised Jesus from the dead.
All
So
right.
I'm still a
That's good.
Christian
That's good.
for that, sir.
You got it. Well, we got to cut it down, shut it down. But you know what? This was a great debate, man. Really exciting, really good argument and passion put forth by both you guys. Thank you for coming through, guys, and preparing and getting these points out, Victor, and also Brian for being able to bring your strategy to the table. And I really enjoy it. And we're going to work on the NDE.
Yeah, we got to
debate.
come to an agreement,
Yeah,
Mr.
that'd
B.
be
It was
nice.
an honor debating you. Thank you,
Hey,
sir.
me too. Likewise.
Hey, the
Really
whole
good.
week
Nice
I was
meeting both
like,
you guys.
the whole week you had me going back to your
Oh yeah, me
debate with
too.
you and me.
Yeah, me too. Nice meeting you
All
guys,
right.
both of y'all, really.
Yeah. Nice to
Okay.
meet
All
you
right.
too,
Thanks,
man.
Scotty. I'll see you
All
guys.
right. Y'all
All
guys
right,
have a
man.
good
We'll
evening.
see y'all
All
later,
right.
man. Y'all have a great evening.
Thanks,
You
Scott.
too.
All righty.
See y'all later.